chat.
Okay, so we have a chemical colony, and it looks like water. No, I'm just kidding. It's still loading.
Okay, we are in. Welcome to the second newcomers tournament, Group C, Round 5. I'm Philophanic with Black Magic, and this game we have Jay, Revolting Peasant, Bot 5, and Zip playing with us. Now, you were right about that being a chemical colony, Black Magic. Good clairvoyance there on your part. What do you think about this map?
This one is going to be really awkward. So what I would look for is this is a chemical colony, and chemicals start expensive. There's one good there's one good spot where QZipco got. Here's why I don't like that though. It's nowhere near water. I would say founding somewhere close enough that you can put some. Let's see. I actually don't mind J to the 2, even though J to the 2's found looks a little bit light on carbon. I don't mind it that much because he can go into water right there. He's got silicon and he's got aluminum. And he's got his water. Yeah, he has a low water nearby, so I actually don't really mind his found. Let's see where the other one. Bot 5 definitely has a good spot on his little platform there, and then Revolting Peasant has a decent spot because it's close enough to water, and he's an expansive, so he can go for all of those awkward resources. Out of all of these, I'm a little surprised to say that I actually like Jay's spot the best because fuel is going to get really, really awkward.
Yeah, looking at the rest of the map, the random number generator was not nice
a robotics HQ
to any of
has
the
been
players.
upgraded.
So everyone should blame Jay for hosting the game.
The black market is online.
And surprisingly, Jay got the I've gotta give him credit. Well, first of all, he needs to put down that water pump.
Yes.
He did not put down the water pump, but I'm a little surprised because that's a spot that you wouldn't typically see as a good spot. A lot of people wouldn't recognize that as good because they're only mostly low tiles nearby. Now, in terms of the found position, I would say that I would rather than found right outside the crater, I would rather found right next to the aluminum.
Yes. Since you're going to ship that carbon anyway.
Correct. So I would rather take that to the south of where the metal mine is. That way you can be adjacent to both the aluminum and the silicon. You won't have to ship either of them. You're just going to ship your carbon over. And then it also brings you closer to the water that he still has not put down yet. I think he's just forgotten about it.
Yeah, it's sometimes easy to forget, especially with that unused tile notification. Maybe it needs to flash.
Alright, so let's take a look at Revolting Peasant. So, Revolting Peasant, like several of the other people, going into the carbon right next to them. In this case, I'm okay with it. Because it's going to give them enough money to set up their wind turbines. There's a dust storm coming up. They need to get that goon squad down pronto.
Yes.
But in this case, I'm okay with taking the carbon because it's right next to their base and they had an idea of what to do with it.
And perhaps long term they might be able to make some chems with that carbon. Since
Correct.
This is a chem colony, so it's a decent short term and potentially long term play on Revolting Peasant's part.
So for let's take a look at Bot 5. So Bot 5 is a little bit stuck on a platform, so they're going to have trouble expanding. And furthermore, it doesn't help that EMPs are on the market, so you can pretty much hit all of their tiles with one conveniently placed EMP. In terms of the buildings that they did, I'm mostly okay with it, with the exception of I would have placed that solar panel on the other side where the chemical refineries are, just to give 2 tiles adjacency rather than just one.
Right. Yeah, other than that, there's no way to hide from that EMP on that platform. We'll see what he does as he continues to level up where he places those more claims. That'll be interesting.
Worth noting that Revolting Peasant just a second ago was making $1,000 a second worth of power, still making 765, so that's a sudden gigantic bolt of cash. boost of cash. Now, one negative about this, though, is that, I mean, this is still close enough to transition over. You know, so it's still good. It would have been better if they could have maybe, you know, put it over to the right for a little bit less wind, but maybe, you know, adjacent to their base. I think I would have preferred that a little bit more, because you don't have the direct access to it later on.
I do like that he's putting down 3 steel mills. That'll help him get to level 4. So he didn't have any steel production until right now.
Mm-hmm.
Those 3 steel mills we've seen in some of the past games, some expansive players only going with 2. And while yes, you do use less steel when you upgrade, it's not that much less steel.
Yes.
So you still want those 3, so you can power through those upgrades faster.
Now I like how Revolting Peasant is going into some solar condensers right over there. That's going to be fantastic, and it's not really able to be pirated based on the location. You might be able to steal a little bit if you stick the pirates out to the left, but it's probably not worth it to do because pirates can be crushed by a building. So,
right, if he builds something there, then his water will be safe.
Now Q-Zipco is going for teleportation, and there was a slowdown strike on that. Here is my, and now it's going to take 132k. So, if you were just independently looking on the map, you would think of Q-Zipco's as the best spot because it had great carbon right next to it, and the aluminum was relatively close. The reason that I don't think it's quite as good of a spot is because you're so far away from. There's only one water nearby. And other than that, you're kind of left out. Now, if it had not been a chemical colony, I would have been okay with it. But there's an early, quick teleportation rush. In order to do this, number 1, you were slowdown striked, and there's nothing you can do about that. Number 2, that teleportation that you're going for costs 20k.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just an enormous amount of money that's going to slow you down in order to get teleportation. And teleportation doesn't necessarily help you a ton. All it does is get you to a steady state where you're on par with other people. Meanwhile, J to the 2 has kept everything close by, and I really like their configuration where they're able to go to chemicals right now. They're able to benefit from Q-Zipco having to spend all that money on chemicals to do teleportation. So going for the lower carbon was a lot better. I like that spot a lot better than going for the the more obvious high carbon spot.
Right. And just back to your point about the slowdown strike, if we have any new players on this stream, Q-Zipco did not have a goon squad up. However, even if he did have a goon squad up, it wouldn't matter because the Mafia respects workers' rights and those slowdown strikes go right through.
So at this point, Revolting Peasant's done a good job in transitioning those over to transitioning his wind over to chemicals. What makes it kind of awkward is he has to keep throwing carbon up onto the ledge, and he has to bring fuel over to there. So that's where I was talking about maybe take a slightly less
good power spot.
A slightly less good power spot, just so you can switch it out, and then you don't, you get instant access to this. The other difficulty with having it up on the ledge like that is, in this case, it can't be pirated, but the negative is by the time you get all those chemicals in glass will save up 60 before it sends something. So a lot of times, you can see his production. He's got 40 of 60, but it's not going to send unless you manually launch it. So the negative of having him up on that ledge is by the time he gets those back, chemicals have already started crashing because other people are selling them down. So you're not getting that instant benefit where you can sell them at the higher prices.
He is moving into electrolysis reactors, which, since he has the water to sustain and fuel is really high, and with all the shipping actually, since Q-Zipco went for those went for early teleportation, might be less than you might expect, but it's a good, decent transition. With, yes, his triangle's making 230 a second on fuel.
I'm really impressed so far with J to the 2's positioning and what he's done. So one of the other things that people looking at this might not notice, it's not very obvious, but he was able, either consciously or unconsciously, he skipped power entirely.
Mm-hmm.
So all he did was go into things that made money. Other people brought, a bunch of power to the equation, so he didn't even have to build power. All he had to do was go into things that are going to be making him money, which is fantastic. So
right.
At this point... Oh, go ahead.
If you hold off till HQ level 3 to make that power transition, hopefully he was able to see that everyone else was going into power with Revolting Peasant on power 2, and then you'd know that you don't need to go into power. But...
And here's another point, power related, that you can think of. It's similar to the carbon point that we made on a previous game. Not going into power and raising that power price isn't necessarily a bad thing. You have a robotic player in this game, and so you're just further pushing them into debt by keeping the power price higher. Meanwhile, you're not taking on nearly as much debt, especially as a scavenger, which don't use as much power. So don't be so, even though you may see a power price that says, oh, it's $100 a second for power, but if you have, anywhere above, say, $25,000 in debt, you're not going to be making money on it anytime soon. So it's better to skip it until HQ, say HQ3 or HQ4, until you can make money on it.
Right.
So let's see.
Think about...
Teleportation was taken by Bot 5.
Right,
so,
he beat with the slowdown strike, he was able to take it from Zipco. That was a well play by him.
So think about that. So that was 19k that was tied up. You were hit by a slowdown strike, and then you ended up being in the awkward position where you have to bring all of your water really far away, and that's really unfortunate because in this case, I mean, you're just consuming fuel to bring in something you need anyway. So.
Right. Now, since he had committed to that, you should realize that Bot 5 is going to want teleportation also due to his awkward location.
Mm-hmm.
He should have thrown a strike right back on Bot 5's patent lab immediately if he had the money. I don't remember at the time, and you may still have been able to get that.
Yeah, that might have.
He bought that goon squad after the slowdown strike had went down.
Yes. So let's see, in terms of untapped markets, you've got glasses at 96k, food is about 80k, and power is starting to get up there. Now, unfortunately, Revolting Peasants in D because they switched out of the power. This is a good time to scrap those chemical refineries and get back into power.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other danger of going into wind instead of like a geothermal. With the geothermal, it's up and it stays up. I could have argued. Let's see.
Jay
Okay.
has one solar panel, which is keeping him from losing all that power money. He's still losing about 100 a second on power, although part of that's because it's nighttime and the solar panel turned off. So he's keeping himself out of debt with that one panel. Although we might call this a black magic solar panel, because it's one by itself.
I'm okay with, especially if you're I think at this point it's probably the fact that he couldn't afford the second one until you get silicon. Now this would be a fantastic time for J to the 2 to start going after somebody like Revolting Peasant. Even though Revolting Peasant has 120k, they're in D debt and their stock price is cheap. Revolting Peasant should be the target.
Yes, I disagree with Zipco buying into other people right now because while that aggressive move is nice, J to the 2 has 185k in resources, and Zipco has not defended himself.
And this is where if Q-Zipco goes after Revolting Peasant right there, J to the 2 needs to start buying into Q-Zipco on the back end. And
yes.
well, it looks like Q-Zipco has enough to defend though, so...
Missed opportunity by J to the 2. I'm not sure why Q-Zipco was going after Revolting Peasant after Revolting Peasant had procured himself.
Yeah, I don't know.
So that, a little bit of a strategic misplay there,
New
but
building is
he
available
didn't suffer
for
for it
auction.
yet.
So this is an interesting move by J to the 2. Going after an off-world for 80k.
So-
I don't, even though you get you would get say a 30k launch. I don't know that I agree with it. I think in this case that on-road prices are so good and you're making so much money off of water and food and things like that. I think instead going for an optimization center, I mean, you're making 211k off of those glass kilns.
Right.
You're making a 370 off of water, which we knew was going to be awkward. I think just optimizing some of those things, like, going into optimize glass first and optimize a little bit of food. I'd rather see going for 2 of those than an off-world, I think.
And as you mentioned last game, the reason why you don't like the auto off happened just now. Those electrolysis reactors were off, and he was sort of benefiting. He had too much water. I'm not sure. I don't think he sold down the water. Somebody else just crashed the water price.
The
He
black
lost out
market
on
is
all
open
that
for business.
potential. But there was the fact that he's floating all that water, and his electrolysis reactors turned off, even though he could still have been making money from them since he wasn't selling.
Correct, and people have plenty of water. There's at this point, Revolting Peasant, he's a negative 8.7, so he's the one that's most in trouble from it. But water isn't too bad yet. Somebody crashed the price of water, of course, and then now all of a sudden farms are incredibly profitable, and glass has always been profitable. I'd like to see more people getting into glass.
Yes, getting the glass, some optimizations on glass. Outside of J,
Engineers have advanced on
where
production.
is the rest of the silicon on the map? There's some up in the northwest corner.
I think that there's not. Let's see. So there's a high. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all in the northwest. It seems like it's all in the northwest region. So J to the 2. That's something. He already has some silicon, so that's good.
Bot 5 has potentially 3 silicon tiles. Right now, 2 of them he's using with electronic factories. He would get an additional 20 per second on if he switched those electronics factories over to glass.
Yes. So let me. I want to take a look at J to the 2
For auction.
in terms of how many launches they've gotten so far. Because I can't imagine that it's very much. So they've gotten 1 launch thus far, and that's why I'm a little bit bummed about going for the early off-world. Normally I love to go for an early off-world, but in this case I think it was way more valuable to do something like what Q-Zipco did, was buy into Revolting Peasant, who had a low stock price, instead of going for that off-world, because by this point you've only gotten 1 launch off, and now you're a little bit more behind. Sure, you have an off-world up, but
The off-road
you could have been
market is finished
optimizing or
and
buying
awaiting
into
orders.
And
stock.
we saw last game where optimizations beat 2 off-worlds in the end, with the scientist beating Revolting Peasant. So this might be another example
Our
where
methods continue to improve.
optimizations beat off-worlds. We'll have
Yes.
to see how it plays out.
Now,
I don't
one
think
thing that
anyone
I don't,
has an optimization center, which these high
I think
prices.
yeah, I think you're right. Worth noting that Q-Zipco is straddling C and D, and I don't think
Off-road market is
Q-Zipco
assembled.
is
Our
launching
fortune
anything.
awaits.
Their off-world is idle and it's unprotected too.
Yes, that if you do build an off-world, make sure you're launching from it.
And-
Q-Zipco doesn't have a lot of money.
Optimization routines
He could
successful.
sell down his food and immediately start launching.
But he can
Or
launch
launch those
food right now. Because all you have to do is you just have to have the 100 food.
He
Just
needs,
auto launch the food,
he
and then
needs
you still
1.3k worth of fuel, and he can't afford it unless he sells out of water. Is what I would do personally.
I noticed that QZipco is not auto selling anything actually.
He hasn't disconnected,
Yeah.
so I'm curious as what he's doing. So, in a 1v1 situation, you often don't want to auto sell to punish people, but when there he goes. Now he's selling down manually. But when a lot of people are producing water and water price is really high, you definitely might want to be auto selling that water just to deny them the profits that they get from auto selling the water.
And you can see that J to the 2 has so much, so much water production there that, you're essentially taking out some of those tiles. Now, J to the 2 is going for a second off-world, which is a good move at this point.
Better than his first one, those prices have
Black
crept up.
market is online.
I'd still like to see an optimization. Oh, Revolting Peasant does have an optimization center.
The black market is
Now,
online.
unfortunately, fortunately for Revolting Peasant, QZipco is in a little bit of a spiral here almost with the debt, and doesn't have. They only have 140k. Revolting Peasant was able to pay off a whole lot of that debt to make sure those debt interest ticks don't become difficult. So now Revolting Peasant actually has a shot to buy QZipco and get all of his stock back.
Right, which is definitely something Revolting Peasant should be thinking about. Revolting Peasant has just jumped 375k in resources, and he only needs 547 thanks to that lower stock price due to the interest and high debt that QZipco's been getting. And with that QZipco's off-world, that would be a pretty decent pickup. Sure, it'll take a little bit for the debt to be paid off, but he'd be making
Pirates.
money
I hate
and
those
get a nice
filthy
stock
bandits.
boost from that sub in the long run.
Now this is a good, if you notice, Revolting Peasant is getting closer and closer to that buy, but yet Revolting Peasant spending 139k on building an off-world, so that's the wrong way to go. In this case, it's better to let QZipco hit that debt interest tick, and then buy
affirmative. What a
QZipco. Just
payout.
go with one off-world. Okay, so bot 5
Beat
got the
Revolting Peasant.
QZipco. Oh, so that is huge. That is
huge.
absolutely huge.
Our methods
So
are
bot
continuing
5
to
is in a
improve.
really strong position off of that.
Bot 5 gets that immediate stock boost from buying QZipco, and right now, as I mentioned earlier, QZipco is
The
only
black
making him
market
about
is
100
online. Surprised.
a second,
Just
but as that debt gets
disappointed in
paid
you.
off, how the sub income works is you get 1% every second of the cash on hand of the sub. So as those off-worlds keep on churning for QZipco, bot 5 should be getting into around 1k a second from that sub income, maybe a little bit higher.
Successful
So let's take a
off-world
look.
shipment.
Let's take a
Make
look
room
at
for the
how bot
profits.
5 came to be where bot 5 came to be. So buying into QZipco after QZipco went after Revolting Peasant was fantastic, because
Optimization
getting
routine
into
successful.
QZipco gives you 50% of Revolting Peasant. QZipco's not going to sell out of Revolting Peasant, and now you have such a stock price advantage at this case, and you're making a bunch of money, off of a subsidiary and own a whole bunch of other people. All you have to do is focus on J to the 2, and it's going to be relatively close.
The black market
But I
is
think
open
that
for
bot
business.
5 has a very good chance at getting the buy on J to the 2 just based on the
engineers
stock
have
price.
advanced our production.
It takes so much money to get there just by buying QZipco. It's boosted your stock price immensely, so they should be able to get there. It might be kind of close though. I think they should still be okay based on the subsidiary income and how high their stock price is. So that's, this is where I really like J to the 2 start off, but then not buying stock and going for that first off-world and then that second off-world really left them
The
behind.
black market is
Right.
online.
So that's a good lesson in terms of you've got to be careful when you go for the off-world and if there's open stock that you can use, especially, QZipco going after Revolting Peasant stock was a great example of how you can, instead of going for an off-world, use that to make money. And then when Revolting Peasant started paying things down, you could even sell out at that point and get your own off-world up.
Well, I'm wondering if Bot 5 should be going after Revolting Peasants and not Jay, because Revolting Peasant already has 94% of the buy, if I'm reading that correctly. Revolting Peasant needs...
Revolting Peasant, yeah, 98%, 99, 100%.
I'm not sure where that's... That 100%, I'm not sure where that's calculating from, because he has 800k.
They have 100% on each other.
He needs 1.2 million to buy out Bot 5, so that 100% must be something different. I think they changed that in the patch notes for observers. That might be... What? His 100% is on J to the T. Revolting Peasant could buy out J to the T right now.
So, Bot 5 got to the buy on Revolting Peasant. I think that should be enough to still catch them up because of the really high stock price.
Right.
It's gonna be closer than I thought. I think it's still the right way to do it, just to push the goalposts a little farther away. And you can see it's 41 versus 45% just by doing that. Yeah.
Right. I do notice that Revolting Peasant appears to be the only one with a Pleasure Dome, which is making a nice 254 a second.
There we go.
So, as you mentioned earlier, Pleasure Domes can make money. Especially in this case, they're not making as much money because we do have that one robotics player.
Successful off-world shipment.
As the only one in it.
Make room for the profits.
That's a really nice tile.
Shipment launched.
So worth noting, J to the 2 had the 2 off-worlds for almost the longest amount of time. But Bot 5 getting all of those buys and getting the subsidiary income was huge because it just makes it that much harder to buy. And you can see Bot 5 was able to get their 98% already on J to the 2, and they're just going to beat him to the foot race by having that expensive of a stock price. So the lesson in this one is make sure if there's some open stock out there, make sure you strongly consider getting into that as long as you don't tick them off and they can buy you.
Correct. And then when you do have enough resources to buy out somebody floundering in D debt, don't build an off-world. Make that buy. If he had split QZipCo with Bot 5, this could be a completely different game.
Yes. So the other thing that you can do, if you can't get to the big thing about buying in early is if you can't finish that buy anytime quickly, you shouldn't be in them. So in this case, if you just can't get over the hump, and in this case for QZipCo, if you can't buy Revolting Peasant, and Revolting Peasant was doing everything he could to try to pay down debt and boost the stock price to move the goalposts further and further and further. If that's the case, they suddenly pay all their debt and their stock price jumps, sell out of at least some of them and put up your own off-world. Or you could potentially just sell out of them entirely and go after somebody else.
Right.
Unless you can get an early buy, what'll end up happening is it'll string you along for a long time. Eventually you'll get the buy, but other people are getting up off-worlds. They're, essentially think of it as dead cash that you have invested in somebody. If you can't finish it,
economists would call it the opportunity cost.
There you go, your opportunity cost. I was an economics major. So you have that much cash that's put into it. At some point, you've got to think, well, other people are passing me by, and all I'm doing is making, if you can't get it done, all you're doing is making an enemy and making yourself a target.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you have to sell, you may sell 2 or 3 stock in order to do it, but sell out a little bit, get your own off-world up, do other things that you need to do, invest yourself, but, don't stick in there, or essentially you just, in this case, Bot 5 came by, bought QZipCo, and then they get both of you. So
right. Bot 5 got 236k from QZipCo in dividend revenue, which is a nice amount. Not the best, but a good amount.
Well, that's
actually everybody. True. So
and remember that dividend revenue, sometimes it's a little bit misleading because when you get somebody like Q-Zipco and Revolting Peasant, at the very end of the game, you're buying an HQ5 expansive with a bunch of territory, so it starts to pile in a bunch of dividend revenue at the very
at the end. Yes, I noticed J to the T actually sold more off-world than Bot 5, and two reasons. Part of the reason was he built those off-worlds early, which we criticized, but I also noticed he kept on mutinying Zipco's off-worlds. So J to the T often had 4 off-worlds launching.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure if the AI doesn't re-mutiny their off-worlds back, or...
the AI does not mutiny their off-worlds back.
Okay.
So if you see a subsidiary, I from what I recall, the AI or a subsidiary does not buy black market. So if somebody goes in, that's I think we had talked about that a couple of games ago. So if there's a subsidiary or an AI and they have an off-world, and it's not your subsidiary, make it a target. That's almost like a free off-world in that case. If you can plow through a goon and get a mutiny, not only are you gaining an off-world, but you're also hurting somebody else's subsidiary income. So rather than take a fight directly to a player that's going to keep gooning it, consider going after a subsidiary or an AI's off-world to get a little bit extra cash.
Now we mentioned wanting J to the 2 to go into optimizations earlier, and if we look at the resources sold on the balance sheet, he only has 421k versus Bot 5's 1.1 million.
Mm-hmm.
And you can easily see that just from looking at the optimizations tab. Bot 5 has 9 optimizations versus J's 0. With those high prices, you definitely want to build an optimization center.
And oxygen, and food and oxygen in the mid game were very profitable. It was glass. Glass and food were very profitable, and that's the part where we started talking about an optimization center rather than going into the off-world just to get that up, because you could make so much money on-world, and instead of spending that much money for an off-world, go into, invest in somebody else. So it's not always a given that you go directly as quickly as you can for an off-world market, because, the cost of setting it up and, the time to get that first launch on, you could have been doing something like going into Revolting Peasant where, you can make some money off of it even if you don't get the buy. So
since I feel sort of bad since you've been criticizing Jay so much, a little criticism on Bot 5. He did go for that perfect in electronics, which, while electronics was really high, I'm not sure.
Electronics, though, I mean, if you look at the resource price, as of Sol 7, electronics were at 360, and they got to like 530. So, especially as a robot, I don't mind that just based on the trajectory of that. But it is more expensive to get into perfect, and typically I don't recommend it. But in this case, it worked out pretty well. That being said, if you look at Bot 5, Bot 5 production, they're in a bunch of chems and not in what he optimized.
Right.
So, and by the way, I don't want to come off as if I'm criticizing J to the 2, because I think he played an excellent game.
Correct.
I was incredibly impressed with the foresight of founding there versus the obvious spot, and all of the production that they had. It was just the mid game, and Blues has in the Gamepedia, he has a guide to the mid game, and that's definitely worth it for new players to check out. In terms of strategies to deal with how to get over the hump, and let's say you've done well, you've made a whole bunch of cash, and now you go, what do I do with it? Do I invest it in somebody? Do I, go off-world? Do I do a hacker array? We didn't actually see any hacker arrays in any of our games, but...
No. Some of these games with higher prices may have been a candidate for a hacker array, but it's a lot harder to do a good hack in a 4-player free-for-all versus a 1v1.
Well, this one would have been an excellent candidate for a hacker array, and I know your end is jumping up and down as I say this, because Silicon was incredibly awkward, and people didn't have it because it was located all the way in the northwest corner, and J to the 2 was really had a monopoly. So not only could you use a hacker array very effectively with all the cache that you had, but you make it super awkward to produce any of those glass or electronics that were really profitable by keeping that high.
Yes.
So
hacker arrays, I believe, have a little bit of a buff. They now come in with a built-in hologram.
That's correct.
Which does not get destroyed by any of the goon poppers.
Yeah, so the network, and I think I saw that today. So you can hit a network virus on a hacker array and it doesn't expose it.
I believe that is the case.
Yeah, that's what I read. I was a little bit surprised to hear that, but
I think that was an attempt by Soren to buff the hacker array just a little bit because it's being underutilized. We'll have to see how that plays out in the new meta once everyone gets used to this patch.
Year-end and Steph are jumping up and down just for that because they love their hacker arrays. I love it in 1v1. I don't use it enough in a 4-player until I get down to, me versus somebody else, typically, where it's in a 1v1 experience, because it's really difficult to make money. If you're in a 4-player game, 6-player game, 8-player game, unless you use it early, it's difficult to use correctly just because it's hard to be in a monopoly of a resource.
Right.
So.
This being an exception, a hacker. If Jay did a shortage on Silicon, it would have benefited Bot 5 a little bit, since Bot 5 had one Silicon. He could have transitioned those electronics factories, which are on top of Silicon mines, out, but it might have been worth it this time. And Jay, as Black Magic was saying, we're not criticizing you to be picky. It's just you did a really good game, and there's just some little things that you could change here and there, which may have new players, including myself, sometimes have trouble with, and had trouble with pretty recently.
Yeah, I thought you had it, Jay. Based on your play, you did a very good job. I thought you had a really strong case for it. But that being said, give all the credit in the world to Bot 5 for investing in the stock on the way. QZipCo made a great move to go after Revolting Peasant. The problem is, if you can't get the buy, then you just make it, you've sweetened the pot for somebody else to buy you.
Right.
So
it's awkward. Found Bot 5 securing that early teleportation from QZipCo also greatly helped him.
Oh, and that was fantastic using a slowdown strike in that. Last point that I wanna make is underutilized black market item. The number one item that stands out to me is Pirates are only 6K.
Pirates are only 6K.
Pirates are only 6K. So you had that really expensive Silicon all game. You had very expensive water that you could pick off from QZipCo. Those are where, especially QZipCo can, use Pirates to his advantage. But, Pirates, and the other thing that I would note is J to the 2 could have potentially purchased a core sample to rectify that really awkward carbon over there.
Right. Since it was near carbon, it has, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but a lot higher chance.
Correct.
Of getting additional carbon. Revolting Peasant did buy and use one core sample. I missed that in game, so I'm not sure what he gained off of that. But when resources are awkward, like this map, and you have a core sample, it might be worth seeing what's around you. Maybe you find something a lot closer to your base than shipping from the other side of the map. That's something I think a lot of Blues, I believe Blues says the core sample is not used enough. I might be misattributing that.
And it's not used enough. And to tell you the truth, I probably don't even use it enough. It doesn't show up. Sure. It doesn't show up that much, so you're not used to it. It's the core sample. Network virus previously wasn't used nearly enough, but it's gotten a little bit better in terms of identifying goons and popping goons. But and then Cook the Books is the one that you want to take a look at, as you can found a little bit earlier, cook the books, get to HQ4, and then pay down your debt. So those are the ones that you want to look for if you're a newer player. You know, later on, start to master those. Last point for me is that boosts were at 14k. I am a big proponent of boosts, even though there's a slowdown strike there available. You know, that's something where QZipCo can take advantage of the quicker access to the black market and boost it and make them use a slowdown strike on your offworld, or make them try to pop your goon, things like that. But that's one of my favorite. So I hate to see it so cheap. Yes. Especially with all those offworlds.
Especially, it's all the offworlds. When power was weird, you could have used the Otai at the beginning of the game, and then in the middle you could have used an adrenaline boost to pay down some debt or something like that. So.
And then just because I happen to notice QZipCo's base, I have one more point that I'd like to make. If you look at QZipCo has two offworlds right next to each other. Side by side. So here's ordinarily with adrenaline boosts on the market, I absolutely love that. However, with slowdown strikes on the market,
and
I don't think it. Well, EMP's true. Yes, absolutely true. EMPs and slowdown strikes is the reason that I don't like having them together. If you're able to defend two of them, then it's great. So like if goon squads are relatively cheap when you put up that second offworld, by all means put it next to each other and boost it like crazy. When there's slowdown strikes there, the slowdown strike goes through the goon, and then you're essentially impeding the progress of both of your money makers in that case. So if it's just EMPs and boosts in there and goons are relatively cheap, by all means stick them next to each other and boost them like crazy.